All right. All right, everybody. Welcome back to the TFR Tech Talks. With us today, we have the illustrious Derek Maines from the Process Fixer, Process Triage, and many other things. How's it going, Derek?
It's going great. Thanks for having me, Teddy.
I'm happy to have you. So we got a lot to talk about. I want to get to it. So one of the big topics that's currently in the zeitgeist for especially companies that are trying to pursue an omni-channel strategy are ones that are related to how are you using your data? Where are you getting it? What are you using it for? And then how are you using the information you have to fuel a bunch of company objectives that most of these companies will have, which is growth, customer acquisition, customer retention, operational excellency, and just streamlining operations across the board. So given your background, I just wanted to get some of your input on how you view this.
Yeah, I think it's such an important topic. Data is life in a lot of senses, but insights is way more important than data. And I think, unfortunately, what we have in the modern world is we have a lot of data. We don't have as many insights as you might like. If you think about a dashboard, we talk about this all the time with executives. Executives want dashboards. And I'm like, I'm okay for you having a dashboard as long as your hands are on the steering wheel. And the dashboard is something that you just glance at on occasion. It cannot guide the decisions on the road. It can tell you where you are. It can tell you how you're performing. It can give you some direction on how you're moving. But listen, even in my Tesla, if I look away for too long, Elon has that trigger in there that's like, hey, bro, you got to pay attention to the road. And I unfortunately think that we've lost a lot of that since the 1990s. I think there's a real big belief that we need all of this data and we need this data. And we're trying to get insights from it. But real insights, Teddy, is not just knowing why or knowing what it means. It's knowing why it happened. And if you go back, and I'll go on a little bit of a story here, if you go back to the invention of scientific management, which really came around the turn of the century, not this century, but the last one, and this guy named Taylor, and Taylorism was a really big thing, late 1800s into the he died about 1950, but his ideas dramatically affected Ford and really everything that we do. And it was this concept of scientific management. What does scientific management mean? It means that data collection must occur at the front of the organization, and data insights need to be passed up through the organization. But that's different than what we talk about today. See, we're still collecting data at the front of the organizations, but the insights are happening in the boardroom. That is not what Taylorism was. We didn't have computers in 1910. What we had in 1910 was statistical control charts. Well, that really came in at about the 1915s or so. But these ideas of tracking data at the front line of the organization, how many cycles does this machine do? How many units does it produce? Gathering that data. But then instead of just passing that dumb data back up through the system, the people that were there when the data was created were responsible to say, hey, look, in the last 8 hours, here's what our production was. In hour 4, it was significantly lower. And the reason was this. And we've taken steps to make sure that doesn't happen again. In hour 7, production levels were extremely high. Here's why that occurred. Because we tried this, because we did this. Then pass that insight back up to leadership and management. So the leadership and management can look at the system now and can say, how do we tune the system based upon not only the data that was collected at the front line, but the insights that were collected as that data was being collected and analyzed. And then management makes decisions, but they make decisions focused around what was called then experiments. So that means management then says, based upon the data that we had from that day and the insights we heard from the frontline people, here's what we want to do. We want to try this. But that wasn't set in stone. There was no SOP. Instead, they said, okay, try this for the next 24 hours. And then they look at the control chart again, look at the data again, and they go, oh, that's interesting. When we increased the lighting on the floor, production went up by 3%. let's go get some better lighting, right? So they allowed the data and the insights to drive what they needed to do. This is very different. Today, I think we look at data and then we try to drive it down through the organization, what we think those insights mean. But that Taylorism concept of scientific management was the exact opposite. It was the people at the front saying, here's what's happening, here's why it's happening. Mr. Manager, go fetch me a solution. And the managers like puppy dogs running around to go provide more information and more materials and more tools to do better and better experiments, so that every single day is better than the last day. Versus looking at things sort of patterns over time, they were affecting those patterns every single day. That's a long enough answer for you, maybe?
I love it. Actually, I've got a couple of follow-up questions.
Yeah,
for you,
please.
Because I think it's a super interesting concept of, first, I want to have you talk a little bit more about, let's define the difference between having data versus having an insight and what you do with those.
Yeah. Sure. So data really is just that dumb data that comes out of a system, right? Insights is, why did that happen? It's truly understanding not only just why, but the how and the where it happened. Here's a great example of an old story from Japan. After scientific management, the next real innovation was a guy named Schuhart. Walter Schuhart in the 1920s worked at Bell Telephone, and they were trying to figure out what Ford did. Was Ford figured out how to create a pretty decent car for the masses, that if it broke down, you just walk to your local True Value hardware store, you got a new water pump, and you walk back and you fixed it. That didn't work at Bell Telephone, because Bell Telephone now all of a sudden went from Ford's manufacturing big things with big parts. Bell Telephone, 1920s and 30s, is trying to figure out how to do microscopic production. So they understood that they had to collect data in what they called a control chart. XY axis, time on the bottom, quality, quantity, cost, or on the left-hand side. And they would track the data, because this is before computers. There's no automation. There's literally a clipboard there with a little XY axis on it, and employees are responsible to go put dots. Okay, yeah, we got 11 that hour. How many did we get last hour, guys? 12. All right, great. How many did we get the hour before? 6. Hold on. That's outside of the average range. Why do we have 6? Joe over there had a bad burrito at lunch and he had to step off the line. Okay, that's something that we can't really control. Let's eliminate that number and let's look towards this average. So that's really the difference. Data is what's being collected. Insights is the why and the how and the where at the point of collection. Now, I know everybody on this, and even my data person, is going to say to me, no, Derek, I can get insights on the back end. Yes, you can. You can get macro insights on the back end. You cannot get micro insights on the back end. And the micro insights, in my mind, are way more important than the macro. Give you an example. 1951, at the end of World War II, America was producing 10 cars for every employee in the automobile industry. Japan, who had just suffered catastrophically throughout the war, not just Hiroshima and Nagasaki, we forget for 6 months we dumped 40,000 tons of napalm on Japanese cities. It was utter total destruction. I mean, 66% of Tokyo was destroyed. Tokyo at that time was larger than LA is today. So just, you know how big LA is, right? Yeah. I mean, Tokyo was 17.7 million people. LA is only 17.2 million. So, I mean, it's a serious city, and 2/3 of it burns to the ground. So the story that I want to talk about here is they started adopting these measures of collecting data on the front lines and then asking the people collecting the data at the point of collection to provide insight. And they taught these quality control measures, primarily called a process control chart. There's an old story about a receptionist that heard this in her training about these, quality control and process control charts. And they said, yeah, but you're a receptionist. Like, you don't need to do these. It's not important. It's more about the quality of manufacturing and outputs and those kind of things. But she decides to do it. So she starts making little XY axes every day. And she starts to track things like the number of phone calls coming into the building. And she does that for a while. And she says, this is very interesting. Tuesday is at 11 o'clock. There's a lull. If I want to go have a smoke, that's the best time to go. Thursdays at 3 p.m. Don't ever leave my desk because it's going to be busy. So she starts doing this. Then she starts saying, I wonder if let me start tracking by department. Where am I directing these calls? So if it's a sales call, I'll have a little chart for that sales, and I have one for marketing, and I have one for service. And then one day she starts to hold those charts against each other. And she goes, oh, wait, this is interesting. Sales calls fell by 1% yesterday over the average. Usually on Tuesdays, we average this many of sales calls. It was off by 1% yesterday. That's fascinating. Oh, look at this. Support calls were up by 2% yesterday. I wonder if that's something. She tracks it the next day. Sales calls are down again. Support calls are up. She tracks it another day. Sales calls are down again. We're talking about fractions of a percent. We're not talking about big numbers here. So finally, on day 3, she goes to her manager and she says, something is seriously wrong. Like, we have a major catastrophe going on here. And he's like, what is it? And she shows him her charts. This is pure data with her insights. She's like, look, we're on the down tick on sales and we're on the uptick on service. And she's like, do you think maybe we shipped a bad product? And he's like, look, we would know. Like, our engineers would know. Like, we would know. And she's like, I'm just a receptionist. I'm just giving you the data. So he goes out and finds they shipped a shipment of bad product. And the receptionist knew about it probably 2 or 3 weeks before anybody else would. And they could immediately stop those items from going out. They could call the customers that hadn't installed yet. They could be like, sorry, stop, do not use that product. We will send a courier out to replace it. We have a problem. What did that save the company? It could have saved the whole entire company. I mean, imagine if Boeing could have figured that out, right? So this idea of data, yes, data's there. It's raw. It's at the front line. And yes, there's insights that can happen at the macro level. But for God's sakes, the people collecting the data, there when the data is created, there when the 1 and 0 are calculated, man, there is something there. There's really something there. And a great example of this is after the war, I told you 10 cars for every American auto worker versus 4 that the Japanese did. Using this method, 20 years later, the Americans were still producing 10 cars per employee. The Japanese were producing 60 cars per employee over the course of 20 years. 15,000% increase in productivity, and every Japanese employee was worth the equivalent of 6 American auto workers. I mean, that's pretty good, right? Just taking that insights at the front end and bringing that back up through to gain continuous improvement, incremental fraction of a percent here, quarter of a percent there, full percent here, over and over and over. So that's the difference to me between data and insights.
Love it. So one more level I want to go through with this.
Okay.
One of the observations then is that prior to kind of having what we have now as the norm, when it was more of a iterative scientific process almost of, have a hypothesis, test it, evaluate, and then, do it all over again in shorter feedback loops. It seems like that's less of the norm now. What do you see as if this is something that is a better way of going about continuous process improvement, what is the transition point that a company should aim to go through, or how should they look to implement this if they find that this would be better for them?
Oh, Teddy, you just used the right word, aim. So here's what's happened, unfortunately, in Western management. 1954, Peter Drucker introduced management by objective. Before that, we had scientific management, statistical control, and employee empowerment. Everybody inside the organization was a scientist. I don't care if you're working on a machine or if you're driving a forklift, you have a control chart and you are tracking things. You are making experiments. You're going, wait a second. You know what? If I put my forks down a minute earlier as I'm coming into the pallet, oh, wait, look. Oh, look at this. I can see how it affects things. People were empowered to make their own decisions because American management in the 1940s and early 50s ran not on goals, but on aims. Companies had an aim. We aim to take this market position. We aim to grow by this much. We aim to improve this. Drucker comes in and starts to create this concept around goals. And here's the problem with the goal, Teddy. When you give me a goal and you incentivize me financially for obtaining that goal, I will do anything to get and hit that goal, including doing direct actions that negatively affect the organization, including doing stupid things that I know shouldn't be done, including cheating the numbers, either deliberately or maybe unintentionally doing it. Teddy, have I ever showed you that video from I Love Lucy?
Yes.
The candy video?
The chocolate?
Yeah, the chocolate video is a perfect example. If you all remember this, it was very, very famous. Lucy and Ethel get a job in a chocolate factory because they want to make some extra money on the side and they don't want the guys to control their money. So they go to work at this chocolate factory and their first run is pretty bad. And the manager comes in and says, I'm going to fire you. You're done. If you don't fix it this time, you're done. So what does she do? She turns the production line on. The candy starts coming back. At first, they're like, oh, this is great. We can handle it. Then they realize that the goal stands in the way. So what do? They start eating the candy. They're shoving it down their shirts. They're putting it in their hats. They're doing all these things. Then the manager walks in and she goes, oh, wow, look how wonderful you guys did. And they're both standing there looking at the camera like, we just ate all the profits of this company. Every single day, American companies do this. We set up goals and then we want people to achieve a goal. So they do whatever it takes. And we don't fully understand the repercussions of that goal. Instead, if we had an aim and you said, our goal is to improve every day by 1%, Lucy and Ethel would have said, this is impossible. We can't do it. Here, let me show you why. Here, look, see, it comes out too fast. Oh, okay. Well, then let's adjust the speed to the pace that people can work. And then let's see, can we improve that over time? Hey, can we bring in a little bit of automation? Can we put an ERP into place here? What can we do to improve upon that to work towards that aim? But goals stand in the way.
That's so interesting. So it's about the incentivization of like, what are you incentivizing will determine what behaviors that you coax out of your people.
Teddy, Fort Bragg dealt with this about 10 years ago in Georgia. They created a program. They had a problem with feral pigs on the base. And they decided the best thing to do was to give soldiers permission to go out and kill these pigs. And they needed it done so badly that they put a financial incentive in place. And they said, every pig that you as the soldiers kill, cut off the tail and turn it in and you get a $100 reward. And these soldiers were like, this is a great idea. So the first thing that they did was they realized that you don't want to just go out, scouting around for pigs. Easiest thing to do is to bait them. So they got high amounts of calories and they dumped it out there for the pigs to eat. And then they sat in wait while at these bait sites. So that did a couple things. First thing it did, let me step back. They did this for a year. At the end of the year, they came in and did an analysis and found that there were more pigs on the base than there were when they started. And they were like, wait a second, we just incentivized people to kill hundreds of pigs and there's more pigs. So they did an analysis and they found something very interesting. The first thing is that the baiting of the pigs increased the nutrition that the pigs were getting, increasing the carrying capacity of the base, meaning that females became significantly more fertile and they were much more likely for their young to live. The second thing that happened is not only did the guys want to get the $100 for the tail, but one of the commanders on the base created a pool where everybody threw money in to see who could kill the biggest pig. Well, let me tell you something about pigs. Big pigs are always boy pigs. So the only pigs that were being shot were the big boars. You have all these fertile females. None of them are being killed. They're highly more fertile now. They're only killing the trophy-sized males, meaning all the teenage boy pigs are like, this is good times, baby. I mean, every female pig is in heat. Every one of them is highly fertile, and all the big bully males are out of the way. This is like, this is like, Meatloaf and Dashboard Lights. I mean, this is good stuff, right? So all of a sudden they have this explosion of births on the base. But the other thing they found was this. Not only was it just the nutrition, not only was it just the trophies, but there was a slaughterhouse located just 10 miles away from the base. And that slaughterhouse slaughtered pigs. And guess what they started offering for sale right after the incentive went into place?
Tails.
Cases of pigtails. Cases of pigtails that they were selling out the back door. Sell a box of pigtails, $25 a tail. I can literally drive them down the street and get $100 a tail because I have my military ID. So the game was rigged because the incentive was incorrect. They incentivized the wrong thing. They set a goal and they did not obtain. Look, if you measure the goal by how many pigs they killed, how many tails, they did great. But if you actually went and looked at the data afterwards and you took insights from that data, you went, this sucked. Hey, this was not anything that worked. So we have to be super careful with this. And we have to understand that data is really important, but insights are even more important at the high level, at the macro level, but that micro level. If they had talked to the soldiers and said, what are you doing? If they would have put a little whistleblower program around and said, how are we getting so many tails? They would have very quickly found out what was going on. So we do this all the time. People laugh when I tell these stories and I'm like, but you do, I guarantee you have commissioned salespeople. I guarantee you do some sort of piecework kind of compensation. I want to loop back. I mentioned Taylorism earlier and scientific management. One of the most interesting things about Taylor is he had two different ideas. The first was scientific management. The data rules the day. His second idea was the concept of piecework for employees. Now, here's the interesting thing. A lot of us use a concept around piecework. How much work somebody does, we want to give them additional rewards for that. The ideas of Taylorism were put into factories in the early 1900s. This is even before the time of Ford. And they seemed to work positively, at least according to Taylor. Then the New York City public schools were so enamored by this idea that you could incentivize and reward people to perform better that they began to offer candy and toys to children who got the best grades. After 3 years, the school board had to end that program because, according to the New York press at the time, children had obtained a mercenary spirit in which they would do anything to achieve their goals, including making sure other children were unable to achieve their goals. They literally created a generation of children that were mercenary, ruthless, relentless in the attainment of their candy and toys, even if that means I've got to beat up Billy so that he can't be there to take the test. That's what we've implemented in our businesses. I mean, it's silly, it's stupid, it's nonsensical, but it is the ideology that every one of us grew up with when we were told how to manage, and none of us ever questioned and said, does that make any sense? And somebody goes, I don't know. What do you mean sense? Like I was told this by my boss, and my boss learned this from his mentor, and his coach told him. Just because it got passed along doesn't mean it's true. So we have to rethink these things.
Yeah, I mean, coming from a Lord of the Flies type scenario and going into something better, it seems like if we ask better questions, we get better outcomes related to what are we trying to optimize for. So in that same vein, if we are going to move from optimizing for goals to optimizing for aims, how would you go about making sure you're asking the right questions to get there?
Well, the first thing you have to do is you have to look at your people, and you have to, we use the most derogatory term when we think about employees. We call them, we say it's the all hands, right? We have an all hands meeting, which essentially is saying, I have hired you from the neck down, and I want you to come to a meeting and hear from me, the almighty head, the master of the universe. Please,
I've never thought about it that way. That's pretty funny.
Yeah, please come, you little minuscule hands. I mean, actually, I'm working on a presentation right now. It's really interesting. I just found this out. This is really cool. Let me just pull it up really quick because it's sort of it plays into this. Do you know where the word manager comes from?
No.
Yeah, so it's actually there's originally manus in Italian was a word that meant. I'm sorry, that's the Latin. It means to control your hands. And then the Italians, managerial, is where that word comes from. It means to hold or control your horses. It is a term used in riding horses to say, get a hold of your reins and pull that thing back, jerk that thing back and get it into comply. So even this concept of hold your horses is actually what management is. It's literally saying control your people. I don't know if that's the best thing to do. So to me, if I want to focus on an aim and not a goal, I don't really want to manage people. I want to empower people. And how do I empower people? Well, we go back to Taylorism. We go back to Deming in the 1940s and the process control charts. And we train people on how to do a job. And then we say to them, look, you need to be tracking the data from this job every single day, looking for ways to improve it. You have permission to experiment. I've actually worked with organizations in the past where, and there's a big company right now. I won't say the name because I think it's not well known, but they actually have an experiments budget for every employee where they say, look, every year you have to spend $2,500 on experiments. Well, what are those experiments? Figure out if there's a way to change the lighting in your office and track your productivity. Did it go up by that? How many more words a minute did you type when you had a 27-inch screen versus a 32-inch screen? Like literally they're telling their people, you can spend money to try to improve your environment and your work as long as you can prove to us statistically that there was an effect and you're tracking that effect. So that's what we have to do. We have to get out of the way of holding our horses and controlling people with a bit in their mouth. And we have to say to them, look, I assume because you know how to do the work that you probably are somewhat of an expert on the work, more so than I am. So I'm going to empower you to say, look, our aim is to improve. Our aim is to get better. Our aim is more and better. That's a good goal. It's a good aim, more and better. Do what you need to do to get more and better. Now, listen, we can't affect work that affects quality. I can't say to a surgeon, go in there and recut. I can't do those things. But what I can say to them is I can say, experiment on the outsides of those things. Anything that requires compliance is a little tricky. Cyber, you come up with some theories but really empowering people at the front end of the organization to say, how do we make the work better? How do we do it? How do we do more? And what are the things that stand in our way? That to me is what an aim is about. It is not about looking at a 3-year, 5-year, 10-year. I was just in a session this morning. They're talking about 10-year goals. I'm like, bro, like seriously? I have no freaking idea what the world will be like in 10 years. I mean, we could have singularity by then and it wouldn't even matter. Like, it's just so outrageous to think that way. But if I just have a daily aim and my daily aim is better than yesterday, like that's going to get me way more results than having some big, hairy, audacious goal that nobody has any ability to affect or to get. So many times I talk to people inside companies and I'm like, what are the goals for the company? They're like, I don't know. I have no idea what the goals are. Well, then how can you be steering the ship at the front line if you don't even know where we're going? Like it's when you put it into analogies like driving, it almost makes us seem stupid. But that's because we've never questioned the dogma or the ideology. Like that's what we have to do. We live in a different world today than it was just 3-4 years ago. Right. Like think about the ideas that we have on management. Those ideas, the most recent idea about new forms of management is probably management by objective, Drucker, 1954. I don't think that works in today's world. I'm sorry. I don't think it worked in that world. So why the hell would it work today? So this is what we have to do, Teddy. We have to empower people at the front of the organization to take the bits out of their mouth and to say, look, let's give you some power. Let's track these things through. Let's not just use the hands. Let's engage. There's a real interesting statistic. 100% of people that are going to come to work tomorrow, well, Monday, we'll say, because it's Friday, we're recording this. 100% of the people that show up with their hands to work also, oddly enough, bring their heads with them. It's a weird statistic, but it's 100% of the people that show up with their hands also bring their heads. I mean, you're paying for the damn thing to be there. Like maybe let's try to get some insight from it because those are the people that should be able to give the insight because they're the ones that did the work. Hope that makes sense.
It absolutely does. And I think there's a lot of different directions we could take this conversation. And I want to have a series of these with you because, as you mentioned, it may not have even worked using those methodologies at the time that it came out. And now that we've been talking about transitioning from the industrial age and the manufacturing age and people working in factories to the information age. Now we're going into the age of AI, where there's even more leverage that can be had from a person's ability to leverage the tools that exist in this moment and the tools that are developing and the development of the current tools as it's going to change the value and the output of employees moving forward. So I think it's really important to look at management in a way that makes sense for the context by which we exist today and what we're going to be dealing with, not not even any more time than tomorrow. If we're looking at Murphy's law, we're actually in Moore's law, we're actually there already. We're watching the exponential curve as we're sloping upward. So really interesting stuff. I want to touch on one more point because I think this all underlies it.
And I want to talk about AI for a second too.
I'd love to get into it.
Yeah.
Well, actually, let's go into AI first because I'll give you a preview. The last thing I want to talk about is going into process triage because I believe that this actually ties into, well, if we're trying to get insights from the front line, how do we go about doing that, right? So, that's a bit of a teaser.
Let me mention AI a little bit because I, my podcast, The Process Fixer, the first year and a half of that in 2020, I started it in like April, right after ChatGPT launched, a few months after, and I interviewed all sorts of great experts, including some of the top AI experts. Interestingly enough, most people do not realize that the original documents, the foundational documents for AI were written in the 1950s, like 1953, I think, is when they were published. So I had some really amazing people through that, and I was really enamored with AI. I use it myself. I think it's a great tool, but I am also a big listener of philosophy. And there is Benjamin, I think it is Walter Benjamin, who I think he died in the 90s, a philosopher. And I love the way that he thinks because it's very abstract, but he talks about, he takes you through this thought experiment. And he says, if you were to see a picture of the Mona Lisa, is that the same, Teddy, as seeing the Mona Lisa itself in Paris?
No.
There is a feeling. He says there is an aura that occurs in real life, and that technically, if you've seen the Mona Lisa in Paris, I've went and seen the Mona Lisa in Paris, and I've seen pictures of the Mona Lisa. But he also says, what if you actually just took all of the colors that were in the Mona Lisa and you yourself meticulously created an exact copy of the Mona Lisa? Does that copy still have the same aura as the original? Does it still give people the same feeling? I got to tell you, I've stood in front of the Mona Lisa. I don't think so. And this, unfortunately, is exactly what AI is doing. It can recreate things, but it cannot create things. And it can speed up the processing of data, but it will never be able to obtain the aura that goes along with place. And, we so many times think about art. Like I'm an art fan. You can see I have lots of art. One of the things about art that is so interesting, and I thought it was snobbery when I first did it. One of the things with great art, and this is pop art. This is not what I'm talking about. Although there is some great work that this gentleman does. We have a number of abstract art pieces. You've been to my house. You've been to my house, right? Yeah. So there's something about standing in front of a piece of art, clearing your mind, and letting the art speak to you. And I'm not talking spiritual stuff. That's not my game at all. I'm really serious. You can feel the presence of the artist in the work. Unfortunately, it's always going to be a misinterpretation because I don't know what was happening in the room at that moment in time. To the artist, it meant something even more, right? But being able to stand there in front of that Mona Lisa and get that feeling of place and perspective. If you've seen the Mona Lisa, it's way smaller. Like I have this idea that it's going to be this huge. No, it's like
it's like one of the smallest things in there.
It's like 8.5 by 11. Yeah. I'm like, this guy used A3 paper to do this. What's the deal? But the point is that aura cannot be replicated. It only exists in the original. And even to this point, like this artist, many of the artists I collect sell prints. I do not buy prints. I will not buy a print. Mm-hmm. And yes, I tell myself it's because value, but the reality is I don't feel the same way with a print. I can't smell it. I can't imagine the artist doing it. I mean, it's a copy of a copy. So fortunately, I think for us, AI will never be able to reproduce that. I thought for a while it could. I got to tell you, we're 2 years now and art, it's doing some cool stuff, but you can still tell the difference. And I don't think it's a difference in fidelity. I think it's a difference in the aura that exists around things that people create and that respect and that honor for seeing this and saying someone took that from their brain and literally like did it. And there's something to that I don't think AI can ever capture.
That's really interesting. I don't know that it's a counterpoint necessarily, but it's a different perspective where I think there is. So I'll make a carte blanche statement, like human generated art of all sorts, whether it's visual, whether it's music, whether it's, building something physical, that will always have its place and it always have value. And there's always going to be a recognition of greatness. But I think similar to the way, electronic music has become its own art form and its own lane, I do think AI is going to have a place in creation where we start talking about AI created. I'll use games because I'm a big gamer as an example, where you have, somebody design it, but AI is the one that is coming up with the interactions inside of a game. If you're interacting with an emergent story between, NPCs, non-player characters across a massive, online world. I think this is something in our somewhat near future that is close to what the Matrix was basically theorizing with its story. We're a little bit close to it, not necessarily from visual fidelity and being in there and interacting with it, but more of we're starting to get little inklings of it. So I do think there's a place for it.
I do too.
To your point, I don't think it'll ever displace human art that we have a value in society for.
I do think that we are going to go through a renaissance again as well. And I think it's probably in the next 5. I think the presidential election will affect some of this. I actually don't foresee the renaissance coming from the US. I think it's probably going to come from outside because I think, unfortunately, let me share with you my philosophy on Western culture right now, because look at the top 10 movies out there. I don't even need to look. I can tell you that they all are probably number 2 or number 3 or number 4. They're like, as far as like, there's no new ideas. It's Raiders of the Lost Ark 27. It's Creed 16. It's Fast and the Furious 90. It's Spider-Man, 99. I mean, it's we don't have new ideas. This has been going on for about 4 or 5 years. It's really gotten significantly worse. If you look at the last 20 years of music and art and movies and media, there are new ideas. They're gone. I don't know what happened to them, but they disappeared. And it's gotten worse and worse and worse every year. Even the new ideas that we have are like Garfield, Barbie. I mean, what? Fall Guy. It's just over and over and over this pastiche blending. Even the Eras tour from Taylor Swift is just a repeat of her old information. And Eminem's album, his guest star on it is Slim Shady. It's an old version of Eminem. There's nothing new. When I was growing up in the 80s, I was a musician. I mean, there were times literally I was on stage when Nirvana dropped and I was in hairband. And it was like, we're packing the clubs and I'm like up there, doing my thing. And a week later, there's like 3 dudes in flannel and everybody else is gone. And I'm like, cut my hair, put the flannel on, start doing Nirvana and Pearl Jam tunes. That doesn't happen anymore. Listen to modern music. I mean, and I'm a big fan of electronic music as well, and EDM and that kind of stuff. But in pop music, I can't tell if a song was 2024 or 2001. They all sound the same. That was not the case 40 years ago. I mean, I can hear songs from the 70s and I'm like, that sounds like 76. And I can usually get within a year because the trend at that time. I can't tell the difference anymore. I hear a song, I'm like, oh, that's new. And somebody's like, that's 10 years old. I'm like, really? Because it sounds the same as the modern stuff today. So this is a real challenge. And what AI is good at is the blending of things and the speeding up of things. But the creativity, the creative thinking, the insight piece is what's missing, the aura and the insights. So I'm a big fan. I use Claude and ChatGPT all the time to help me with everything that I do. But the reality is the idea still resides here. And I think that's people that embrace that will really be 10x, 100x, 5 or 6 years from now. It's the people that resist it that'll be the problem.
I 100% agree. I look at it as it's a multiplier of your abilities, but
force multiplier is the right word. It's a force multiplier. Whatever force you have, it multiplies that. And that's a really powerful thing. I think there will be people that will be lost in the dust. And I think you'll have 25 years from now, you'll have an analog revolution as well. I'm a big analog guy. I mean, You see this? I don't like pens. I don't believe in pens. I think pens are probably the most damaging thing you could use inside of a business because a pen means finality, like sign on the dotted line. A pencil, man, I blow through erasers. I got freaking pencils everywhere because I blow through erasers so fast because I'm constantly changing and iterating. If you want to be a creative, if you want to be someone that creates, you need to eliminate pens from put one in the safe when you got to sign something. No more pens. Even my what looks like pens here are all mechanical. I do not believe in pens. I think they're detrimental to society, and I don't like having them in my presence.
You know what? I'm sold. I'm in the pencil revolution. I'm in.
I see you've got a little character back on your thing there, and he's holding a pencil. I saw it earlier. He is holding a pencil, isn't he?
Yeah, that's right.
I saw it. Yeah, this pencil thinking is a real big deal. I have seen this happen with executives that I work with, that when they move to pencils, a couple things happen. First and foremost, they iterate more. They become more creative. But here's the weird thing. The message that it sends to your people, this is the dirty little secret. Don't tell anybody this. But the message that it sends to your people is that it's okay to change your mind and make mistakes. Totally fine. You can change. You know what? That idea is better. With a pen, I'm reluctant to scrape things out. With a pencil, I'm just like, here we go. Start over. Let's do it again. So that whiteboard mentality, that ability to erase and re-record and do it over and over and over, it's something that we've lost. And, you can't do insights with a pen because you've got to be able to track that. You got to be able to circle it. You got to be able to go, oh, let's eliminate this one because that was outside of the statistical control. So this pencil thinking, I need to buy, what's the company that makes, this one's Ponderosa, I think. I need to buy stock in the Ponderosa pencil company because I'm bringing Justin brought sexy back. I'm bringing pencils back.
2025, Derek is bringing pencils back.
Yo, hey, have you ever heard I have my own rap theme song called The Process Fixer. So I am literally, now that you said that, I'm going to have to get him to write a rap song about pencils.
It's the intro of your podcast,
right? It is. Yeah. I use it as the intro of my podcast. Yeah, that's cool. All right, let's wrap this. You got one last thing we want to drop on everybody, right?
One last thing I want to drop on this. We mentioned it a couple of times, but process triage. Yeah. What is it? How can it be used? And have you kind of talked through it from your perspective?
Yeah, so process triage is a 30-plus-year-old idea that started at a big telecom company here in the U.S. It's a very analog version of discovery. It is an analog version of data collection, and it is an analog version of communication. It starts with mapping out a process on a wall with people that actually do the work. We call them the believables because they actually know how stuff gets done. It's not us theorizing on how people are doing it. It is them actually showing us how they do it. We do it with some assets like this. We use a blank wall and we get up against that wall and we build that map with them, allowing them to be the authors of it. We're just facilitating that. And then once that map is up there, we can do it opens up the entire organization. If we're doing triage, the next step is to ask them where they feel pain, where they can quantify an experience with something that's happening that shouldn't be happening. 60% of the time, I don't get the paperwork. 20% of the time, the ERP doesn't print out the delivery instructions. 15% of the time, I have to call the customer to get the information. Those kind of things. And then we work through remedying that. We teach them critical thinking. We teach them how to actually use this bulbous thing at the top here. They brought it anyways. So I'm like, I'm going to use it. I've already used their hands to do all the drawing and writing and putting it up on the board. Now I'm going to use their heads by asking them a series of questions. First question is, somebody reads out their pain. Hey, 60% of the time this happens. Does that inhibit your ability to do your job? Yeah. Do you know why? What's the most why is that happening? If they question that even for a second, they don't know the answer. Or they go, well, it could be one of, okay, no, we don't know why. Because there's only one answer in the end. No, so we have to analyze why. So we just write that down. Like we're working them through this process of critical thinking. If they do know why, is there a best practice, a policy, procedure, document, method, tool you can show me that resolves this? Oh, we don't have one of those. Okay. Design and implement a policy, best practice, procedure, tool that solves this. If they do have that, has everybody been trained on it? Well, 5 years ago, we sent a memo. Yeah, so you haven't trained anybody. So we have to train them to do it. And then the final piece is that accountability, that enforcement. We have to enforce that policy, procedure, method, or tool throughout the organization. I'm going to tell you something though. Everybody wants to start at the bottom and they're like, well, I want accountability. Okay, you don't get accountability till you first have identified the root cause of the problem and analyzed the solution, designed and implemented a best practice around it, thoroughly trained. And when I talk about training, I am not talking about this BS stuff that we do right now. If you have kids or you've been around kids or you've been a child at some point in your life, potty training is not a one and done kind of thing. I don't just hand you a roll of toilet paper and say, select your gender and you're off to the races. No, there's a checking aspect of this that's pretty freaking disgusting, but that's how it works. So don't think that training is just, oh, I sent a Loom video instead of a document. Oh, wow, great, you sent a Loom video. No, train them. Make sure they understand it. During World War II, when women entered the workforce, the American government figured out a way of training that is far superior to anything else I've ever seen before. Unfortunately, for some reason, they decided not to use it after 1950, and it's really simple. First is the trainer, a dedicated trainer. I don't believe in on-the-job training. I can talk about that in a second. A dedicated trainer trains the person by doing this. The first step is the trainer does it and talks out loud about what they're doing. The second is the trainer does it and the student explains what the teacher is doing. The third time, the student does it and explains out loud in a loud voice what they are doing. What the American government found was at incredibly high levels of retention if you do it in those three steps. We don't do it that way. Instead, what we do is this. We have them go through an LMS for a couple of hours online. Then we send them into the work and we say, well, Joe will show you how the work gets done. Have you ever, I do this little exercise with executives. I will line 5 them up and I will tell the first one every third Thursday, the kittens eat chicken in the kitchen, pass it on. And they whisper that down the line and you can imagine what happens. Everybody gets it all screwed up. And then I say, what is the name of that game? And everybody in unison says, that's the telephone game. And I say, no, that's on the job training. It's exactly what happens. You told Joe, Joe told Sarah, Sarah told Sandy, Sandy told Juliet. And the next thing you know, it's a hilarity ensues. And that hilarity is just burning your cash in a big fire. So stop doing that and go focus back on that piece. So that to me is really critical of getting that all together. And I don't know if I close out that point. Remind me again. I got on a tangent there, Teddy. You gotta help me here.
I'll rein you in,
bro.
I got you. Yeah. So we were talking about process triage. I think you hit on like the main points behind it.
Yeah. And then the next thing is this. Then being able to take those things back and say, how do we fix these things? Because these things are stopping people from doing high quality, high volume, high value work. Let's get all the garbage out of the system. Like AI is good at making things faster. Do you really want to speed up something that is already slewing shit everywhere? No. Like clean that up first, then speed it up. So we don't want to put the cart before the horse. And the first thing that we have to do is clean up our mess. Then once our mess is cleaned up, then we can automate that. And what we're seeing, Teddy, and you've seen this, is people, particularly folks, we've got some folks from the NetSuite community using this method to help them identify where to start. Because why automate a process that has no pain? Like if everybody's doing it and they're doing it in time and everybody's cool with it, like I'm going to focus on the first deployment being the place where everything gets screwed up. Because what that does is a couple of things. The first thing it does, it makes an impact, right, for the client. The second thing it does, the people that are doing that work all of a sudden gain capacity. And capacity to do what? Capacity to learn more, capacity to help more, capacity to do other things, capacity to get trained on the implementation that's happening, capacity to answer your calls when you as an implementer are trying to get a hold of them. Give them that place of capacity first, then work from that outside towards implementing other things.
Love it. So in the sake of full disclosure, how would people go about getting process triage done at their organization?
Well, they just call you.
That's right.
It's the only way to do it, man. Here's the funny part about my methods. I teach my methods. I actually have a new thing that's coming out in December. It's a 3-day all-intensive where I teach all of my methods, not just around triage. I teach my system of the systems. I teach my AC3 DS function. I teach all of these different methods. But I am not certified in my own methods. And this is because Derek tends to go down some rabbit holes. And there are certain workshops that Derek can perform because Derek, it's okay, we're going down rabbit holes. If we're hunting rabbits, I'm your guy, right? Process triage is pretty static, right? It's very, we're running them through something because we're trying to get to an aim at the end, which is a list of items that need to be improved upon, a ranked list with potential remedies. So I don't usually do that work, so we have to call Teddy for that.
That's right.
It's a good commercial for you.
I love it. I love it. All right. So let's wrap this up. So
let's do it.
Thank you so much, Derek. Let the people know where they can find you.
Theprocessfixer.com is the best place to find me. I also have a Substack, relatively new. I am trying to decide if I'm keeping my podcast or if I'm moving everything to Substack. But Substack's a private community that I get on a couple times a month. I do live webinars. I share ideas, ways to improve organizations, and then you can perform those exercises. And then we get back together a couple times a month and jam and talk it through and figure out how it worked and do those experiments like I talked about earlier, like teaching people how to experiment with their business, find ways to improve upon that business, and then extrapolate from those experiments.
All of that sounds super valuable to me. Thank you so much. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. We'll see you next time. Derek, we got to have you back on a full series with this.
Let's do it. Sometime, whenever you want, man. Let me know.
Sounds good.